Researching Burning Silk, the first novel in Destiny Kinal's textile trilogy. From Bucks County, Pennsylvania, to the Cevennes Mountains in France, the legacy of the French Huguenots and the secrets of raising silk.
In the mid-1990s, I began writing a series of novels with textiles as a theme. Textiles, traditionally women's work, degrade quickly over time, leaving little evidence of women's contributions in the archaeological record. I felt the same way about my maternal line. Women I am closest to biologically, though I have never met them, such as my grandmother's mother and her mother. These women had disappeared in the family record, leaving only their name and birth and death statistics, not even a photograph. And yet, I feel I know these women intimately. Now, why would that be? Well, because I know myself. I know my mother and my grandmother and my daughters. Something persists in the female line, I reasoned, something I could use to rehydrate, to re-inhabit, to give life again to my closest maternal ancestors. It simply wasn't acceptable to me that the evidence that they had lived was vanishing. And so, using textile as a central metaphor, I began working on a novel drawn from my own family's history, on the early oil fields, on the New York and Pennsylvania line at the end of the 19th century. Oil and water, the story of my grandparents' parents and their conflicting views of modernity on the cusp of the 20th century, turns out to be the third novel in the textile trilogy. So how did I get back 100 years to the early 19th century? I challenged myself to see if I could write on the first family women to immigrate here from Hesse, Germany. That's how I knew that my story would take place in Bucks County in Newtown, Pennsylvania. Sifting through archives in the library in Doylestown, the county seat, I finally came across this. The people of Newtown had raised silk as an entrepreneurial venture. Many historical fiction writers tell of this moment when their story possesses them. I was electrified. I had found my story, raising silk. I began to read everything I could get my hands on. Within a short time, I had completed a novella based on the first season in Newtown, Pennsylvania, in a silk manyanerie, the place where silk is raised. I had a shadowy protagonist. I had a thread to the Huguenot people, the Protestants of France. Using the novella, I was accepted into Bennington's MFA program. They asked me not to work on my novels. There was too much that I had to learn and unlearn before I could begin my life as a literary fiction writer. And so, it was not until the summer of 1998 that I embarked on a trip to the Cevennes Mountains in France to meet my first Magnanerelle de la Soie. In my earlier experience as a marketing consultant, I found that nothing gives such rich information as seeing how a product is made. Surely, I thought, I would uncover secrets of raising silk during my time there, steeped in the silk-producing region of France. I also intended to study the Huguenot people and their ancestors, the Cathars to the south, who had been persecuted for their Protestant beliefs during the medieval times. Long ago, when I was 8 years old, we had been sent home to ask our grandmothers about our ancestors. German, Irish, Welsh, Scottish, Ukrainian, my grandmother told me, and a little bit of French, she added with a twinkle in her eye. Little did I know that I was embarking on a decade of discovery to become intimate with that little bit of French. I took the TGV to Lyon, a scant 2 hours from Paris, and drove into the Cevennes Mountains, arriving at flood time after 2 days of rain. I went directly to Les Mas, along the gorge d'Ardèche, to visit Les Madame Cauvin at Ma Magnanerie. This would be my first time seeing a real silk operation and meeting a matrilineal line of Magnanerelle, who were very hospitable and generous and sharing some of their knowledge with me. Manyanarel, in charge of raising silkworms to produce a kilometer-long thread of silk wrapped in a neat bobbin called a cocon or cocoon, pass their secrets from mother to daughter. Only women raise silk. Men raise the mulberry, the preferred food of Bombyx mori, the domesticated silkworm. Some of these secrets I had intuited, but these had to be checked against reality. How far did the relationship between the Manyanarel and the worms extend? How did they time the budding of the mulberry with the hatching of the worms? What told the silk workers that the worms were ready to spin silk? At this moment, the elder Madame Cauvin said, bending close to me, the worm is nothing but a great beating heart and liquid silk. The gorge d'Ardèche resembles the gut of a silkworm, that mysterious labyrinth where mulberry is transformed into the liquor that becomes a single thread of silk. They say the worm makes 10,000 figure eights, sealing itself into the hermetic space of the cocoon to undergo metamorphosis. Silk workers cut short that life cycle by stifling the worms in their cocoons so that the moth's emergence will not destroy the profitability of the cocoon and its single thread. Décoconage was a time for celebration when silk workers and neighbors gathered to separate the cocoons from the branches. People spoke of their dreams, forecasting the year to come. In 1685, with the revocation of the Edict of Nantes and their religious freedom, Huguenots fled from France to every country in the world, taking the secrets of their crafts with them, including silk. When the borders closed, Huguenots trapped inside France took to the fastness of the Cévennes mountains, where they lived a fugitive life for a century, the years they refer to as au désert, in the desert. Huguenots who were captured suffered a hard fate. Women were sent to prisons, like the Tour de Constance, where they peered through the slits out to the Mediterranean, hoping for a glimpse of their menfolk who were sentenced to row on galley ships to an early death. Women used shells and pebbles to carve a single word over and over on the inside walls. Résister, résister, resist. In Les Baux, both a Cathar and Huguenot stronghold, a lintel bears the inscription Post tenebras lux. After the darkness comes the light. As I visited all the sites, both of silk production and of the Huguenots, French cultural tourists, many of them with Huguenot ancestry, thronged the sites along the silk route, visiting their patrimoine, their heritage. The Cévennes presents a contrast with its neighbors to the south, Provence, Languedoc. The land, the buildings, the harvests are austere. Many buildings have a third story added to accommodate the silk magnanerie, their cash crop. Flour was, and still is, ground from the chestnut tree, such as Native Americans on the U.S. coast depend on acorns for flour. Cocoons were taken to filature in the Ardèche and Cévennes, where strands of individual cocoons were twisted into thread that could then be taken to Lyon for processing, dyeing, and weaving. Women and girls stood over bassines of hot water, caught multiple threads of several cocoons with a whisk, fed them into the eye of the filateur or winding machine, which then twisted the strands into a single thread. In the United States, at the end of the 18th century, Benjamin Franklin purchased a single filateur to wind the cocoon production of all the silk magnaneries in southern Pennsylvania. The Patterson Silk Factory, just up the coast in New Jersey, was a major customer for raw silk thread, which they dyed and sold to silk weaving operations further to the north, particularly in New England. Silk production did not take in the United States. Some said the American boom-bust temperament was not suited to the exacting work with worm and mulberry. Perhaps the fact that women had to retire from their usual household duties to attend to the silkworms and their stringent requirements for a month each spring went against the grain. Perhaps the fact that it was women's work degraded it in the hierarchy of possible investments. While I have never seen an analysis of the failure of silk production to take hold in North America, my meditation while I wrote my first novel gave me insight into the curses Europeans brought to this continent, where a fresh start would never be possible on the backs of the indigenous people who claim this continent as their homeland. The Senecas say that a story will stalk you, and if it finds you worthy, it will come to reside in your heart. At a certain point in writing a novel, metamorphosis occurs. All of the research that one has digested fuses and begins to spin itself out in colorful pieces as the story moves forward. A mysterious process, and one that offers a powerful metaphor for our own times.